go ahead and start with the first question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Cindy Winter. I live in Larkspur. Hearing all the speakers today, I would term this the age of flexibility, where there's on-demand choices and multimodal. I haven't, though, heard any discussion of rail. The concept of rail, I think, is a last century idea of big, heavy, rigid diesel trains, and they may still have some use in many places. However, for a low-density suburban area, you don't need this kind of train. There are pods similar to the film that Sharon showed, where you can get on a little 4, 6, 8 passenger pod, and it will carry you along a trackway, elevated to wherever you want to go, and to the next station. And the headway between these pods has been narrowed dramatically. So if 6 people want to ride in a 6-person pod, and there are another 6 people, the 2 pods can be joined together, making a small kind of train. They would be autonomous, lightweight, battery operated, solar is possible. They can be elevated more easily on runways, and they can ascend or descend at about 10%. They have a more flexible turn radius. And of course, the people here know that I'm probably thinking of smart, which would be correct. But I just had to get this in because we're in a new century now. It's generated by the cloud. There are so many more opportunities. And I thank all the speakers to date for the wonderful comments they've made. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon, did you want to?
Yeah, well, I did just want to say something about that because, this comes up a lot, like rail and less, fixed route versus flexible. And I think that from our perspective, both are really important, and it's kind of getting it right. And one of the reasons that fixed rail can be so important is because a lot of it's got that permanency about it. And so a lot of land use and real estate decision making gets shaped by that. And so it's kind of a way to ensure a certain kind of land use in long-range planning. And it's also, it's the fixed route transit, or transit that has its own right-of-way and does not have to compete with automobiles, that is going to be the most efficient and, fastest. So that can happen with bus rapid transit. It can happen with smaller vehicles, but it's more, it's more complex to ensure that. So it's just, it's kind of thinking about the circumstances, and, the costs obviously are a big factor in which way a community goes as well.
Thank you, Sharon. I see
Hi. I wanted to raise the issue of transit equity. It was mentioned a couple of times, but not really gotten into very deeply. And there's no doubt that transportation is very much connected to issues of health service and access to healthcare services, access to housing solutions and affordable housing, issues of access to education. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit more, because I know there's been a lot of kind of market-driven R&D talk, but understanding what really is going to ensure that these new technologies are accessible and really supporting this civic infrastructure around health and education and housing. And one of the things that I'd really like to offer as a suggestion in these startup phases of doing research and studies is to really focus on disaggregating your data by age and by income and by ethnicity, so that disparate impact on these new technologies can be assessed from the get-go, rather than 20 years down the road where we go, oh, shoot, we weren't paying attention. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'd like to maybe start with Sharon and then go to Adam.
What? Either, you're welcome to do it too. So I think that's really important, and it is the role, I think, of the public sector to ensure that equity and accessibility is a part of all this. And, you know, it's easy to get enamored with all the new technology and these solutions, and they really are a critical part of the solution, but that doesn't negate the need to make sure that services are accessible. In fact, that's essential, you know, because really the people who are going to benefit the most are the people who need it most, in the sense that the cost, as a number of people have said, the cost of owning and operating an automobile is incredibly expensive, and it also and being able to get access to a job is also a critical part of living a productive life. So I think that having access to data is part of that in planning, but it's also it is working together, though. It's not we can't solve these things just in the private sector side or just on the public sector side.
And I'll add briefly that in all of our studies, I only had 10 minutes, so it was a snapshot, but every single one of our studies on car sharing, bike sharing, ride sourcing, we always ask at the end of our surveys the demographics, the age, income, gender, ethnicity, education. These are standard questions. And what we've noticed for present operations of most shared mobility systems is that we typically do notice that it is a generally slightly younger, much more well-educated, slightly better off, and wider population that's using a lot of these shared mobility services compared to the general population in the study cities. So I think, kind of echoing Sharon, I think that's really where the public sector has to step in, because now that we do have these services where, currently we exist in this more binary transportation access world where if you don't have a car and you're kind of in a transit desert, you're really left out. And I think that it's going to fall a lot on the public sector in partnership with these shared mobility companies as well to make sure that redlining is not happening with these shared mobility services, that now that you don't necessarily need to own your fixed asset, that it's serving everyone. So.
If I could add just one thing, here in Marin, I think TAM's been a leader in this, working with MTC and looking at developing community-based transportation plans that help look at active transportation and transit investments in communities, including the Canal District and Marin City. So there's been work. There's obviously a lot, more that we can do as agencies and transportation planners to think about it both on the planning side and the management side of the systems. And I think this is definitely an emerging topic where we're seeing a lot more focus as we, in the industry. Thank you for, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback on to that question and ask about the availability of shared use, whether it's car share or ride share, for parents of infants and small children who require car seats, and also pet owners. My dog's 68 pounds, and he's got a very intimidating bark. I just can't imagine many Lyft drivers who would welcome him. So I'm curious if you've thought forward to when, we're going to really need to accommodate those other users.
Debs?
Sounds like I should steer clear of your dog. So I think, you raise a really good question. And, right now, Lyft's terms of services is that in order to, be able to make an account on Lyft, that there's a minimum age requirement and you need to be 21 up to do that. So I think, while we don't want minors taking rides on their own, your question around car seats and really making a more inclusive experience for families is something that we are thinking about. And there's certainly opportunities for us to be able to tag certain types of assets in a car to help build out better matching service between passengers and drivers that have certain types of assets, be that car seats, be that bike racks, things like that. So that's something that we have looked at, and I think when we think further out into the future around autonomous vehicles, the in-car experience is going to look very different, and cars might not need to be seated in the same way, or they might be larger, or might be able to have more modular features such as car seats that you can pull out if you need one for your ride. So I think there's definitely things that we can be doing in the short term based on how our service is operated today, but also there's a need to look longer term with autonomous for those opportunities as well. And then specifically to transporting dogs, we do have an anti-discrimination policy where if a user has a service animal that needs to be transported with them, we make sure that that is accommodated for. And for individuals who just want to bring their dog with them, we do ask, to be courteous to your driver. This is their personal car, and we do ask that you sort of reconcile that with them and ask them in advance to see if that's okay, to make sure that allergies aren't an issue or something like that.
Yeah, I would just add to that, when because I was a car share operator for 10 years, and we, it was always a difficult thing because actually people, like if you provide car seats, that can be a good thing, but it's also the parents tend to want to have their car seat, and if you don't need the car seat, then where is the car seat in that car when it's not being used? Anyway, there are just a lot of interesting logistical issues that are solvable, but it's not a simple solution. But some car share companies do have cars that are specifically outfitted one way or another and allow dogs or don't, as well.